Welcome to IAB Canada's podcast, The Business of Digital.
Within hours.
So here we are in Vancouver, and I am joined here by Joni Joyner, who is, what's your title, Joni?
So presently I'm working with Telus. Mm-hmm. So and I guess I don't really have a job title. I'm more a person from the advertising industry, supporting, helping, assisting, advising, doing whatever you want to call it, with looking at sort of projects around data.
Oh, that's a pretty awesome title. How do you get that job? But you have a really long and an involved background in ad tech, right? So isn't that where this whole thing began for you?
Yeah. So I have been out in Vancouver for a year now, and before joining Telus was with Aggear Technologies, mm-hmm. and Aggear being a Montreal-based startup. I ran the office in Toronto. There was about 9 of us, and we were sold to Samsung. We were acquired by Samsung Electronics, which sounds a bit kind of a random thing, but I think to look at kind of the industry and to look at kind of participation of kind of those oddball companies getting into this space, it's all kind of in and around those companies that have smart devices, have data, looking to diversify, looking to kind of find adjacent revenues. And so Samsung had set up a media business for 3 or 4 years, and had trialed participation in sort of monetizing connected TV inventory. Mm-hmm. And actually I was a part of that over in Australia. We were monetizing some of that inventory when I was working for Amobi. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's not too far-fetched when you start to kind of break down, well, Samsung as a mobile phone manufacturer, as a smart device mm-hmm. manufacturer, the whole explosion of IoT and the data that comes with IoT and mm-hmm. These smart devices, and then obviously Samsung launching Samsung Ads in the US, I think about 18 months ago, and that was with their acquisition of Aggear, powering
It's amazing.
That's
Really
technology.
impressive, right? Yeah. So that's an impressive investment and great foresight. I guess they're following the bouncing ball, as you will. Now you're working with Telus, and you're looking at reams of data, I'm sure. But I also, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you while we're out west is because you seem to be really interested in blockchain, and your interest in ad tech, I think, in the early stages of this industry, really tell me a lot. And they tell, it's very telling when somebody has been working behind the scenes on something as fundamental as ad tech, and then makes a switch to discussing and talking about blockchain in a way that is actually practical and tangible. So I wondered whether you can share some thoughts, some perspective on blockchain in general, and
Oh, where do I start? So maybe start with why I'm interested in the notion of decentralization of technologies and the blockchain and all of the hype around that. I think when I've been in the industry since around 2003, and I kind of started off, being an ad trafficker and sort of come through the ranks and sort of diversified into product roles and, kind of client-orientated roles, but mainly sort of taken much of a product-orientated focus. So working with technologies, being part of, developing new ad platforms, new media products, new data products. So coming from being in the space for 14, 15 years now, it's really broken. It's really a broken space, and, kind of been participating in the Canadian market for almost 3 years. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the Canadian market, it's any market, right, that I've been involved in: Australia, the UK. I feel like a lot of the discussions we're having are very band-aid. Like I feel that the fundamentals are just, the industry is starting to mature, and we've realized that there was a lot of things that we just threw ourselves into, and there's been a lot of change and evolution and a lot of kind of sort of just seeing the kind of unfolding of programmatic and the nature of how that came to be, and the fundamentals behind how it's all set up. To me, it's not set up to help either a buyer or a seller, and it feels very much that it's take what you can from it, and nobody's really winning. And then I think you've got this like third dimension, which I think is going to be like the future of and be very much the third dimension, which is the consumer, and the consumer wanting to take control over what they see. And you can see that with what's going on with ad blocking and the rise of the heightened sort of knowledge of consumers understanding more about how their data is being used, or becoming more aware of it. I remember listening to an interview the other week on CBC, and it was about people were dialing in talking about the use of their data being bought and sold and all the rest of it, and really the consumers out there are terrified. And I think when you start to see kind of what's going on in Europe with GDPR on its way in the next couple of months.
Do you think they should be terrified? Before you go on, I just wanted to I'm curious. Do you really believe that they should be terrified, or do you think that maybe it's a little bit unwarranted, or it's a little bit exaggerated because there's uncertainty? What do you think?
I think they shouldn't be terrified. I think there's just a lot of uncertainty, and I think there's a lot of the worst case scenario, and you always hear about the bad stories, right? You hear about identity theft, or you hear about hackers, and that's what you get in the media, right? So I think for the average person, whether it's my husband that knows very little about kind of what I do, or my mom or my sister, hearing those stories can, I think, just kind of it contributes to, oh, well, I should retract everything completely, or, I'm not going to share anything, or I'm going to, give out the wrong data when I'm kind of being asked. But at the same time, I think there's the notion of when companies are collecting data, making sure that consumers are aware of why they're collecting it and why it's important, because sometimes there's a bunch of stuff that's collected that's not necessary. And I think that creates a lack of trust between the two parties. But
which is now being addressed by the GDPR, right?
Exactly,
so,
yes.
Yeah, when we were in California just a couple of weeks ago now for the ALM, there was a breakout session around the GDPR, and one of the questions was, will the consumer in the end suffer from the implementation and the compliance with the GDPR? And so I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
I thought, because when you sort of look at what the value proposition is of ad-supported content, I think that there's something there. There's an argument to be made, and has been research that shows that consumers are getting around $1,200 worth of free content based on just enduring, in air quotes, advertising, which is not that big a deal. No. In the grand scheme of things. And so, when you look at the GDPR argument, we've had ad choices, we've had opt-out solutions and self-regulatory frameworks in place for a long time to comply with PIPEDA. And what we've seen is that actually consumers don't necessarily opt out as much as, or opt, what I mean? Like they don't really, they don't take action. They don't, as long as you're giving them that choice. The problem now with the GDPR coming overseas is the fact that it's getting so much airtime, and the news cycles are really starting to talk about it, including our industry. Maybe we're to blame because we keep throwing around the buzzword, or not the buzzword, but the term GDPR, and people are now starting to really dig into what does behavioral advertising mean, and what does tracking mean, and what do you mean? Like, why is this such a big deal? So we're a little bit concerned about the fact that now there may be a financial impact, a real impact on online advertising as a result of all the publicity that the GDPR is getting.
Yeah.
And that's a problem fundamentally for our industry. And it could be misconstrued due to this almost irrational, not irrational, but sort of uneducated fear that's going on with the consumers.
I almost want to guarantee that we're going to see a drop in sort of data product sales or data orientated campaigns, because people are going to be so fearful. Like once we get to May and there's this launch, there's going to be like, okay, like who goes first? Like, because it's the impact. Well, if I do something wrong, this huge impact on, is it 5% of my revenues, my
It's
total
4%. It's
4%, yeah.
20 million euros or 4% of your revenue worldwide, whichever is more. That's
Yeah.
what the fine is set to. So,
But I mean, it's fascinating, kind of just to kind of like see a lot of what is a hype, and just often just a lack of understanding or lack of education across all of these different parties. But I think
it speaks to what you were saying, right? You were saying about the whole idea of the middle of the supply chain being there for the sake of not for the sake of just being there and turning revenue, but I think it's really been a bit tone deaf with consumers for a long time, and it really hasn't prepared for the day that is about to come upon us.
And you've got to appreciate as well that I think, so obviously, any conversation you get into of, oh, I hate advertising, you hear it from me, I hate it. Well, it pays for this great, array of content and consumption that we have, that we're spending all this time online, right? That it's paying for all of that. But I think the argument isn't I hate advertising. I think it's just the way advertising has went. The way the industry has gotten to is volume, scale. I've got to get my volume so I can get my, kind of hit my CPA targets, or, spend my budgets, or, volume so that, I can make my profitability targets if I'm on the sell side. And then, we've seen our CPMs drop. And I remember dealing with ad targeting CPMs at AOL that were £50. I mean, that's just like, that doesn't even exist. You'd be lucky if you're spending $1 on a data product, or maybe $5 or $3 or $4. But I think we've created this murkiness, we've created these problems, we've created an issue where it's all about just kind of high scale and high volume, and I think we've just lost our way a little bit. And I think it's just the fundamentals of what we're, trying to achieve with, transacting between one another is like kind of failed. So, which is why it kind of led me into wanting to get involved in understanding more about kind of the nature of like decentralized technologies, otherwise known, I guess, as the next buzzword, blockchain. And and it's funny because I sat kind of on the sidelines most of last year, having a wee look in and sort of dabbling in the whole crypto space, and where there's obviously, that's one example of use cases of leveraging blockchain, setting up my wallets, but wanted to understand fundamentally how it could maybe help solve some of our problems, and just particularly as it relates to transacting between two parties, kind of, and also just the ability to kind of validate and verify, because I think that's one of the areas I've been kind of getting into with Telus, which is, leveraging sort of data to help get to a source of truth for advertisers and publishers, right? That's, we have this great source of data, and we could solve some problems around the murkiness.
That's
just
refreshing.
Just by
using data for good.
Yeah, using data for
great.
good and for validation. And so, we get to keep away from maybe more of the hotter privacy hot topics around using data for activation, and say, well, look, that's not necessarily the main use case that we want to focus on. It's more looking at how can we use the data to help create transparency. And so, yeah, it kind of brought me into the world of sort of this sort of blockchain world, and I've sort of recently started helping, sort of took on an advisory role with a company called AdBank, which are a startup in this space, and really they're looking at just helping, sellers make more money, buyers pay for what they get, and buyers to pay for what they have contracted with the seller to do so. So leveraging the Ethereum network and the capabilities around smart contracting and creating those contracts together. So it's like, I am buying males 35 plus at this price, and then really, truly, and honestly getting those males 35 plus in that context, whether it's on a specific website or on a specific category. But being able to follow the money back and being able to kind of validate on not only what I've bought, but, who I bought with, and kind of just creating that source of transparency. So really kind of, cutting out some of those middlemen. And when I talk about middlemen, I'm not actually talking about the ad agency, because, they can be just as much in control of the dollars and the media buyer as an advertiser. And we've got to respect that. But I think
the technical middleman,
it's the technical middlemen. I mean, have you ever seen those classic the disappearing ad dollar infographics where I remember we kind of had that in one of our presentations at Telus where, we showed kind of for every dollar, like, look at how it's divvied up, and how many areas where there's a cut being taken. And I think that's the thing. I think by streamlining some of this and kind of cutting out some of the need.
Yeah, it's
right
a new
now
era. It's really, I mean,
it's,
the industry is calling for a new era. Consumers are calling for a new era. Everyone is screaming. All the writing on the wall says this isn't working. We need a new system. And when we talk to some of the members about blockchain, they try to wrap their heads around, what does this look like? What do you mean by it? Because it is a bit of a, it's a changing of the gears in the brain. How does this work? How can you apply it? And we explain some of the things that have been coming out of the tech lab as blockchain-esque. Let's just say it's blockchain-esque. This idea of ads.txt and this idea of having handshakes. And if one thing doesn't jive with another, the two shall never meet. That type of thing. And once they hear it that way, once they start to actually see a real example that they've actually touched or that they know about, you see the penny drop, and then they start to really understand, okay, ledgers and this idea of transactional record keeping, and and it becomes a little bit less complex. I think as we start to see, and hopefully AdBank will be one of these organizations that once it starts to gain visibility, people will start to feel more comfortable with the concept around it and then start to embrace it a little bit more. Absolutely. Is that what you're thinking? Is that sort of where it's going?
And it's one of those things where you have to, with any kind of brand new project or with anything super new, you've got to just bite off a small chunk at a time. Like, don't try and boil the ocean, right? So like a lot of the focus is really around, okay, forget about RTB. Like, forget about, transacting in that RTB sort of real-time mindset. Let's just look at kind of quite simply transacting either one-to-one or one-to-many in a more traditional, say, ad network play. And, what was really interesting this morning, we've just had obviously the Business of Digital here in Vancouver, which was talking about brand safety. What I'm seeing with my conversations in the market with buyers and sellers is a bit of a retreat to programmatic direct and to one-to-one. So kind of what people are doing are seeing kind of like, what? Yes, I want scale, but you know what? It's not worth it if 50% of my ads are shown to bots, or, I've not got a brand safe environment to show my advertising into. And so there's a retreat happening to some extent, but it was really interesting to hear that verified this morning in the Business of Digital.
Once people start to make any change to the way that they are buying, they'll be open to new opportunities is the hope that we have, right? So once you've already started shifting around budgets, then you'll be a lot more open to, maybe trying different products and different means and different methods. And I think that, we're all looking forward to that day. And one of our newsletter just went out today, and we were talking a little bit about how this is a really complicated time. Right? 2018 is complicated. And it's because of the fact that, to your first comment this afternoon, when you were talking about Band-Aids, we are still solving for problems that may not exist in 2 years. And so this idea of having one foot in the camp of the old, let's just, it's not my job to sort of label anything yet, but, it's one foot in where we are today and throwing gobs of money at trying to fix it. And then one foot in understanding what the future is going to look like. And, these models of, what does privacy by design actually mean? It doesn't mean little opt-out widgets. It doesn't mean that. It means something a lot greater. And this is something that I've also just sort of been tracking, listening to some of the university professors around the world talking about how the internet ought to work is really eye-opening, and it's quite inspiring. But here we are in 2018, still with the constructs that we've built ourselves. We've been in this industry for a very long time. We saw how it happened. And now to change the machine around, that's difficult. Yeah. And so, I wonder, when you're thinking about all your stuff and when you get excited, when you go to those meetings with AdBank because you're on the advisory board and you see people talking about what the possibilities are, do you sometimes wonder how the big three are going to operate within that new construct, and whether or not this new era might level the playing field a little bit? Or what do you think
Oh,
about
I
that?
hope it does.
Yeah.
I think we all hope it does.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think with no disrespect to, Facebook and Google and the Amazons and all the rest of it, like I think that's what we're all hoping for, and that's the thing, is that there is a need to, you can, for sure there's still things that we can do to kind of somewhat band-aid, or there's the short-term and the mid-term fixes we can do on the current ecosystem, and then there's just stuff that we've got to focus on that's like, you know what, there's this new thing over here, there's this new ecosystem, whatever it is, whether it's leveraging blockchain or whatever it comes to be, because the whole concept and the framework around blockchain is still really in its infancy for these use cases with regards to identity or IoT or data, or or the advertising industry. We still, there's so much that's evolving, like keeping up to date with what's happening is a kind of a every day there's things that are coming out. The fundamental shift that you're hearing around that being kind of the new wave of the internet is quite promising and quite exciting. And it will fundamentally change, how we do business across all aspects, as well as like how we can, how we, transact and share data, share our any aspect of ourselves across, kind of between, ourselves and one another, so including like the social media side, the communication side, so the Google and the Facebooks. And I think for sure, I mean, I'm sure they are sitting there, with their own teams figuring out how they're going to evolve as things take off. But you can already see the cracks, right? You can already see the announcements of the shift in approach that Facebook's taking around addressing fake news, the numerous times that we've seen YouTube in the news around brand safety. I think that the cracks have been there over the last sort of 18 months to 2 years. And some of us have, kind of been involved in conversations where, there's been some hairy moments. So I think, I hope that this is going to be the new wave of new stuff, of opportunity. Exactly. So it kind of, I remember feeling like, last year very much like, oh, is it time to leave the industry? Maybe it's been like almost 15 years, like it's time to maybe go and do something else. But I kind of feel like a wave of like excitement to actually be part of trying to solve some of these problems.
Well, that's amazing. And that means you're on the right side.
Well, and I guess sure, it might take us 3 or 4 or 5 years, but I mean, I was around for the start of the RTB space, and that's the thing. It was one thing that evolved to another thing, that evolved to another thing, and here we are. And that's just what happens. So I think as long as we've got people in the industry that want to get involved in just solving these problems, and I think we have that shift. It last year, the year before, it did feel, to me, being in the industry, it was like short term, how can I make as much money as possible, and how can I be yet another middleman, or kind of be yet taking a piece of this kind of growing industry, but very murky and sort of non-transparent industry. I think now that there's that shift where there's opportunity now for us ad tech people and sellers and buyer people to be involved in kind of coming up with like new frameworks. So
it's amazing. It's really exciting, and we're lucky to have you as part of our council member, IAB Western Council, because this is a new area for us, and it's going to be exciting to see things develop and the input that you'll be giving us in the coming weeks, months, and year, I guess. I wanted to sort of finish up by just asking, when do you think, if you had a crystal ball, when do you think that this stuff is going to actually, I don't know, hit the ground, right? Like when are we actually going to be talking about this in terms of, it's here and we're actually doing it? Because I feel sometimes that this industry really suffers from when's mobile coming? When's mobile? It's kind of like the avocado, right? It's not fresh yet. It's not fresh, or it's not ripe. It's not ripe. It's not ripe. And then it's like, oh crap, I haven't built a mobile site yet because I was waiting, right? So are we? Do you think that crypto? And I always make fun of people now because like a lot of people are starting to go into that space, and they're like, oh, I'm in crypto now. Right. It's pretty funny. But anyways, but do you think that this is going to be something that we're all going to see happen tangibly, or?
I think it's going to creep up on us. I think,
like again, mobile did.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you can't just, it's not going to be like, ta-da, here's the new framework and let's all kind of get on board. I think it has to be like small bite-sized chunks solving very small concrete problems. And, going, and then again, how you get sort of momentum is by tapping into those early adopters that are willing to try something different, that are willing to take a bet on trialing something that's in that minimum viable stage and that POC stage. But I think what we're going to see is it's going to kind of creep up on us. And so there's companies out there this year, today, that are actively like, hey, we have an MVP, like we're now going to start to work with buyers and sellers. It's just that right now, those buyers and sellers may be those people that are in areas where they're more susceptible or more interested in kind of playing with different sort of crypto tokens and the token approach. So it could be areas such as like cannabis or those areas are more kind of playing in sort of the mid-size advertiser where they're happy to use a credit card and put money on crypto to transact in this way. I think that's maybe where some of the starting points are going to start to happen. It's more some kind
categories,
certain categories, and then we're going to just see it kind of creep up on us, and it's going to
that's what happened with the internet. I mean, when you think about it, right, it was the financial category that really started to embrace it. I think probably because of the fact that they viewed it as, it's kind of like investing, right? You're investing in stocks. I'm going to put my money, some of it in DoubleClick. I'm going to put some of the money here, right? And so maybe it's maybe you're right. Like maybe that's the way it's going to be. It's going to be categories, and possibly it'll be categories that people are kind of shying away from. For now, like cannabis and some of those sort of touchy categories until it starts to hit CPG. Right, or automotive or something like that.
And once you start showing success in one category or one specific customer segment, then it's going to spread like wildfire, and that's where you're going to get start to see the adoption and start to see it hit some of the larger brands and publishers and stuff. So yeah.
Well, you've inspired me to ask one more thing. What do you think people should be looking to do to prepare? Do you think that they should be actively testing stuff? Do you think that they should be reading certain materials? Do you think that they should be attending conferences? What would you tell a couple of CMOs that are working in various areas of our industry right now?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's the last one. Don't worry.
Read, download Blockchain for Dummies. That's a good read. Gets you started. I think just start reading about it. I think that's the first thing you can do is get your head around just like the very basic concepts, and it's still very much like it's still one of those things where, I mean, even just kind of my kind of earlier foray into it right now has been like, okay, well specifically what are the pieces that we could use, because there's certain aspects where I think for RTB specifically, it's not like the blockchain is not there. It's not quite ready to be able to deal with that level of sort of data transactions. But will it be? No doubt. So I think it's just be aware that this is something that fundamentally could be shifting the whole internet and more than just, it's very much more than just our industry, but yeah, start reading about it and start just kind of paying a bit more attention to, because I think there's a little bit of like the negative of, it's just this fad, it's all going to like burst, it's the next .com
we've seen
bubble.
That before.
Yeah, right. And I'm sure there's going to be, to some extent, there's going to be a lot of fallout and there's going to be a lot of evolution and change, like there is with any minimum viable service or product or capability. It starts with one thing and it grows arms and legs and heads and it becomes something else.
Right.
Exactly. So.
Okay. Well, that's great. And, the IAB in the US has created a working group for blockchain. a committee for blockchain. And I think the day that they announced it, I think there was 150 people who signed up right away.
Oh my
that
goodness.
wanted to be a part of that committee. So it looks like that's something that IAB Canada will be doing as well.
Oh,
and
fabulous.
and so yeah, we look forward to your contributions on that, because I'm sure you're going to be all over that. And I'm sure
Exciting.
we'll probably have a lot of uptake on that as well. So in the meantime, though, I want to thank you very much for spending your afternoon today with us. And
Thank you, Sonia.
and thanks for having come to the brand safety event too. It was fun to have you there. And that's it. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
The latest technology, the CD-ROM computer. This is a multimedia.
Thanks for joining us on IAB Canada's podcast, The Business of Digital.